Subtle but effective. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for making the time today. I've got Ian, Sean, Rochelle, Stella, Paul, Christy Paxton. Hello. Glenda, Alana, and Michelle. Today's session is scheduled for an hour and a half. We'll go shorter or longer depending on questions and how much value you guys get out of the session. Purpose of today's call, myself and a gentleman by the name of Sean Benson, I'll be introducing formally in a minute here, are going over Archibus core project management module use. The module was instigated at BCIT about 6 months ago. We went through some cursory training at that point in time. There's been a few questions that have come up, so we're going to go through a little bit of context building for you. And some actual training. We're going to be doing that from a couple different perspectives, and to get things started, including my introduction to Sean here, I'm just going to bring up the cursory PowerPoint presentation. We'll go from there.
I just wanted to interrupt. I was on the first session. Am I supposed to be on the second session as well, or is this a repeat?
Glenda, this is going to be all new. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, good.
It's not. No, it's not going to be all new. So the good news is that you get an hour and a half back to your day, my friend. So yeah, nice to see you again, though.
Yeah. Okay.
And for anybody else, so you take care, Glenda. Have a good Friday and a good weekend. For anybody else who missed the breadcrumbs context of that question, this is the same content that we went over on Wednesday. A little bit more nuance based on some direction I got after the training, but basically the same information. So if you're here for a second time, you just got yourself gifted 90 minutes back in your day. Bring up the PowerPoint here. Everybody see that okay? Perfect. So in terms of introductions, for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Jerry Mesner. I report up to Ian and Joe, working with Archibus projects over the last year and a half. With me co-presenting today is Sean Benson. For anybody who's not familiar with the name Horizant, Horizant is the company that they're our technical implementation partner for Archibus. So when we're rolling out new projects, new modules, doing dev work, Julie and John are obviously the core Archibus gurus in-house that everybody knows, but Archibus work integrally with us in developing and launching new pieces. Sean has in-depth product knowledge on the PM module and actually all different facets of Archibus. So he'll be doing some of the presentation today. Next slide, getting into it. This is what you can expect for today. So successful exit criteria of today's meeting would be that we hit these things. Number one, that we give you a tiny bit of context. For anybody that's new to Archibus, this is literally going to be a minute to 90 seconds just to give you an idea of what Archibus is and what it's been doing on campus. Second up, we're going to be doing what I call a top-down and a bottom-up approach to the Archibus module. And just want to just articulate this a little bit more carefully than I did in the first session so people understand. If you're looking at, Jerry, I want core information of how to use the basic workflow in Archibus to get from A to Z. We will be doing that, but that'll be the second half of the presentation. The first part of the presentation is Sean taking, like I said, a top-down approach. So he's going to be looking at it from, look, why do organizations choose to use a tool like Archibus for centralized project management? Here's a couple of the end game results that you can look for, and then he kind of shows us how you get there. That segues into my bottom-up approach, where we'll be talking about basic workflow at BCIT from an Ian and Joe perspective, how projects are launched and sent to you guys. And then we'll be actually walking through basic workflow to get information in there. As always, chance for Q&A throughout our time. Any questions before I launch in here? And it looks like everybody has done the smart thing, which is taking the cameras off, so you don't have to worry about presenting in video fashion across the whole presentation. So there we go. The other successful exit criteria I like to have is to make sure that nobody's fallen asleep during the presentation. And I do that with a really astute method of follow-up, which is asking you, did you stay awake for the whole thing? So hopefully we'll keep everybody awake. This is the context for Archibus. For anybody who's new to BCIT, or you've heard about Archibus, but you're not sure what it is, in a nutshell, it's something called an IWMS, which is an integrated work management system. Does 4 core things at BCIT right now. At the bottom, you can see the project management and capital budgeting that was just instigated about 6 months ago. In terms of volume, the biggest piece that Archibus is used for right now is corrective maintenance and preventative maintenance. But what, Christy asks, is corrective maintenance and preventative maintenance? And I'm kidding. I'm just picking on Christy because I know her from the past. But thank you for that full question, Christy. It gives me an opportunity to address it. Corrective maintenance would be the tickets when people are on campus. Plumbing's not working, an outlet is down, HVAC is broken, AC isn't working. Archibus allows people to log in, log those tickets. It's triaged and managed through work rules in the system, sent to the specific crafts person under the specific discipline they work at, put their information into Archibus, and allows for future crunching of metrics and data to look at, close rate and a bunch of different items for that. Preventative maintenance would be about 5,000 tickets a year. That's things like elevators, boilers, other pieces of equipment that require step-by-step processes to be done either for regulatory and compliance or just for overall safety. So that's probably the biggest volume that Archibus is used for. Literally hundreds of tickets every week, thousands of tickets every year. That gives you the overall context of Archibus itself. I'm now going to pull in the aforementioned Sean Benson, who's going to be taking us through the next 25 minutes or so, the top-down approach, like I said. Sean, I'll just make sure that you've got the ability to share here when it's time. I'll stop sharing and let you open up your screen, but over to you, sir.
Hi, everyone. At this point, you should be able to see my screen and also hear me. Is that okay? Is that true?
I am just letting them bring up your screen now, Sean. You should have it momentarily. There we are.
Good.
And we're looking at a login screen. Is that correct?
Correct. V2353HQ.
I'm looking at the cat video.
You're looking at the cat video?
I'm just kidding.
This is what happens when you work 100 hours a week, Ian. Reality and personal meme viewing time kind of blur into each other.
So we'll go ahead and get started in terms of Archibus. So if you're not, I'm just going to assume that everyone here or no one, there are some people here who have never seen Archibus or heard about it. In terms of the project management, what people generally use Archibus for is, some version of project management, but it's not exactly project management and it's not exactly a financial solution. What it's been designed to do and what it's used for is really as a project program management tool where you're able to review what's happening across all of your portfolio of projects. You're able to look to make sure that you have enough funding, that projects are staying within budget and within scope and so on. And you'll be able to do reporting across systems. The reason why people come to Archibus is they have project management tools which are designed for a single project manager to work, day to day on a project, to manage the resources with the project, to keep track of the statuses of each of the tasks associated with the project, and so on. And most organizations have a financial tool to make payments on the project, to keep track of the budgets, to generate a capital budget every year. That's all done in a financial system. What's missing is the communication between those two groups, the communication of the project managers with the financial system to let them know that work has been completed, and on the financial side, the communication that the invoice has been paid for work that's been rendered. And there's often a kind of a disconnect between those two applications. So Archibus provides a little bit of both. It provides a little bit of the ability to do some capital planning, to create project requests prior to the budgeting year, to add some justification as to why a project for the next year should be put into the budget, or just to keep track of a standard process for managing a project from its initial conception through to the completion and execution of the project, but also to tie that information into what the project manager does every day. So what you're going to see before I even jump in and log into the tool, you're going to see a lot of tools that are very similar to project management, but there's also some things that are kind of specific to financial planning and the capital planning process. And Archibus kind of sits in between. It allows you to look at all of the projects and do reporting on the projects. It allows you to keep track of whether invoices have been paid. It allows you to keep track of the invoices against the contracts that you have, and to compare the invoices with the work that's currently committed and so on. So you can do this kind of you can create this one area where you can do reporting on all of your projects and capital projects. So I'm going to just, with that little bit of an introduction, I'm going to just log in. And by the way, while I'm speaking, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. I'm going to log into the system. It's a web-enabled system, meaning that you can log into Archibus via a browser. And at the moment, I'm just using this kind of local address, which means it just means that the Archibus is installed on my local PC. But generally, you'll have an environment that you log into via the browser. You'll have a username and a password, and you can press login and get a screen that looks like this. This screen has what we call a home page on the front of it. Not every customer has a home page. Some have just a blank screen that says Archibus on the front, or has their ID. But what you can get out of the system is you can have a home page like this where you log into the system, and you can look at the calculations of data across the entire database that Archibus manages, whether it's looking at database associated with headcounts and space usage, whether it's looking at capital programs and allocated funding, looking at real estate return on investments, leases that are coming due. All of the things that Archibus does can be calculated and pushed out to a screen like this by role, so that when your role logs into the system, you're looking at just the kind of key information that you want to deal with on a day-to-day basis and you want to work toward. So for example, you'll see a lot of these home pages work off of a red, yellow, and green stoplight system to let you know what items are really out of their thresholds, what are getting close to being outside of a target range, and then of course where you're doing well, what items are good. So those things that are in green are all within target, within the target range that you've established for some of those items. So this is the kind of end result of using Archibus, that you can generate all of this information, put it on a screen, and then drill into it to get some detail. So for example, if I click on this item, I see that I can look at my capital expenditure and budget variances by individual projects. If I click on this, I'll actually see that amount for each of my projects in the system. Same thing for operating expenses. If I want to look at operating expenses by building, I can drill into the detail. And if you have to drill in even further, generally I can click on that little chart and it will pull up a separate report and let me look at all of the costs associated with the operating expenses for that building. Oops. So that's one method. The other method is just to simply have these alerts like leases due this week or projects with this 20% schedule variance. If I click on that, again, I can load my project metric report, and I can view all of the projects here on the left-hand side of the screen, all of those projects that have a cost variance and a schedule variance, any kind of budget remaining, cost of work remaining, performance. They have something called a performance index, which is really looking at your duration and your current completion dates. And then you have, of course, percent of budget complete, percent of budget spent across the entire portfolio. So there's all the projects on the left-hand side. And I don't have a great demonstration database here, but you'd see, again, all of those items for each of the projects. And that's just one of the kind of default reports that you can jump into and start using as you generate data with the project management application. On the left-hand side of the screen is the standard set of menus in Archibus. So as we said, Archibus is an integrated workplace management system, which basically means it's going to have applications that manage real property and leases, projects and capital planning, space and occupancy planning, asset lifecycle planning, maintenance and corrective and preventive maintenance. Under sustainability, we have something called compliance, security, occupational health and safety, hazard abatement, waste disposal, energy management, green carbon emission tracking, and workplace services for conference rooms and reservations, work desks, hot seats, and all these other things. So this menu on the left allows me to drill into one of those applications. No one here would ever see all of these items. Archibus, again, is defined by roles. So when you log into the system, you log in with a particular role. That role will have access to specific sets of menus as well as specific sets of data. So generally, again, this is when Archibus is being used by a global client, or even a regional client with buildings or departments within multiple regions. there is the ability to segregate what each region or group is able to see, and not just in terms of the menus that they use, but also in terms of the data. So I'm showing you just a little bit of everything, but as you can see, generally what we're going to be talking about is you will have access to the projects application and probably just a few very specific reports that you'll use on a day-to-day basis. So management console is one that we'll look at. This is what you do day to day. There is something called a projects scorecard, which is a high-level view across all your projects of two indicators, basically schedule or time and your costs. And what it does is it kind of identifies from 0 to 1 a performance index and a schedule index for each of your projects based on the timeframes that you've identified. So you can then see across all of those tasks within each project, you build up an index value. And this kind of scorecard lets you know what's happening with your projects from a high level point of view. We can see that Build HQ New is getting a little bit, is running behind slightly. This 96 projects, there's 96 projects here that are kind of that are running pretty well. They're right where they want to be. They're running within cost and within schedule. And over here we have a project that's quite a bit behind in terms of cost. Anything over here is probably something it's too, the budget was wrong or incorrect. That budget was too high, or the scope was too great initially. And you've identified the fact that this project actually has probably a smaller scope or smaller budget and could be reduced. So it's just a kind of a quick big picture view into all of the projects, and you can drill into each of these to look at the details of the actual index itself and then the details of the project. So this kind of lets me look at what this project is all about, what's the overall budgeted costs, and so on, business case, project charter, contact information, and so on. And there's a lot of views like this that you might look at. So as Jerry said, I'm going to start with kind of a top-down approach. This is one of the reasons people use Archibus, so they can kind of look at what's going on in terms of the big picture and drill into your problem areas. So for example, one of the views that people tend to use when they start using Archibus for project management is something called the quality control dashboard, which again is just a kind of a dashboard that looks at all of the projects that you've been assigned to, that you're involved in. And it shows you kind of what's happening with each, where they are in terms of their status, what's currently pending and active, what's currently on time, unscheduled, or past due. And then we can see an aging across the projects as well. You can see how old projects are. And importantly, up in the right-hand corner, there are some 8 or 9 key types of alerts that are being generated by the system as you keep the data up to date. So as you enter information that Jerry is going to show you, that the system's going to keep track of it. So they're going to keep track of things like projects that are past due, change requests that are pending, invoices that are outstanding, contracts that are out for bid currently. All of these things will get kind of tracked as alerts, and those alerts will be assigned to each individual project as well. Down below, you get a kind of a report of all of the projects that we're talking about up above here. So again, we can see that by status, the projects, we have 2 approved projects. These are the target completion dates, the description of the project, end dates, and the current project manager. So kind of key information about each project. And if you want to get into the project, you can get in and look at the status and update, and basically use this screen to move a project from one status to the next if all of the information has been filled out and if everything is ready to move forward. So this is a kind of a high level dashboard of what's happening across all of your projects. Another type of report is the commitment progress status report, which again, it's a little bit more detailed. Doesn't have as many colors and charts, but what it's doing is it's allowing you to look at, again, all of the projects that you're responsible for. Again, we can see all of the current alerts that are in the system. So if we have any change requests that are pending approval or invoices pending, they will show up here. There's a filter at the top, which allows you to look at all of the projects that you're associated with, just the approved projects, just the projects that are currently in execution, and so on. But then down below, we can get that list of items. And again, we have access to the key kind of details, the name, the status, the overall budget, the current contracted amount for the project, A revised contract is the contract plus any change orders that have been added after the fact. Current invoiced amount, percentage of the invoice project, and then total commitment remaining to complete the project. And then of course the start and end dates for the project. So you can keep track of costs, schedule, a little bit of scope here. But if you need to, we can drill in and look at what's going on as well. So for example, here, the system is highlighting the fact that this project has been invoiced over 100% of the original budget. So you're looking at a 255% invoice amount, which is probably not so great. And if you wanted to see why that was, we can drill into some of the details. And now you can start seeing how Archibus begins to organize projects. So each project within Archibus is organized by what we call work packages or design packages, or just administrative tasks that have to be grouped together or within a particular time frame. So a lot of these might represent individual phases. In some cases, they'll represent contracts that you have with your clients. But you group all of the work into these packages, and each package has a description. Can be a contract amount associated with them, unless they're internal, like I said, project management or administration. Any requested change orders by contract, all the approved change orders, revised amount, issued amount, currently approved invoices, and invoice totals. And we can see the problem that 255% invoiced amount is coming from the fact that one of your contractors has invoiced you, it looks like 3 times what they're supposed to. So again, you can drill into that detail and start getting at the detail of the project. So we can see the overall work package contract details. So you can see what the original contract amount was for. You can identify, if you upload the contract document, you can review the contract document. You can see the amount of the original bid. And then if you need to drill in and find out what's happening with these invoices, you can drill into either all the change orders, invoices, and all of the tasks that are part of the project. So I'll go back to the invoices. This is as we said, that contract was $576,000. And for some reason, the vendor has issued 3 invoices, one for $428, one for $580, and one for $720. So again, we can get at what would normally be in the financial system and maybe not visible to us. We can get at this with some transparency into this information. This doesn't mean we're entering invoices here. It simply means that Archibus pulls invoice information, often from finance or some other method, and Jerry's going to walk you through that today, to let you know what's happening so that you can compare that with the work that's being done. So here's the actual task that has been estimated at $576,000. And each task, this is where you kind of tie in the project side or project management side. Each task has information associated with it, a status, a percentage complete, a date to perform, the overall estimated cost, any documentation associated with it, and so on. So that's all designed to allow you to be able to start at this kind of a high level view, drill into some pretty detailed views of the data that you have. Now that brings us into kind of day-to-day functions. Before I show you kind of what you'll be using, the tool that you'll be using day to day to manage projects, are there any questions about Archibus, about what I've talked about so far, or any feedback even about what you've seen? It's okay to say yes or no. I want to make sure as well. I think as Jerry said, it's important to make sure everybody's still awake. So this will be your first sleep check.
Ian just unmuted, so I'm going to say that Ian, you are still awake. Do you have any comments or questions at this time, Ian?
Yeah, I'm good. Just everybody else, please check in.
No comments here, thanks.
No comments, thanks.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, good. Sorry. So I just want to make sure I'm not just blabbing along. Sometimes I find that I've lost connection 10 minutes ago and I've just been talking to an empty screen. So it's good just to get some feedback on anything. Okay, so what we want to do, what we want to show you, what you're going to be doing day to day is using what we call the project management console. And this is a console where you input a lot of this information. And Jerry's going to walk you actually through the whole workflow but I just want to show you the details of the console before we begin. So this looks very similar to the project commitment view that we saw earlier. In fact, it actually says project commitment cost summary here, but it's slightly different from that view that I showed you earlier. This view is designed to drill into projects and update details about the project, to update the statuses, the costs, the current completion percentage, and so on. So again, we start with kind of an overall dashboard that a project manager has. When you log in, again, you're going to log into just your projects, and you'll have the option of, looking at all projects to which you've been assigned a team, or which you're either an approver, or you're on the team, or you're the project manager. Those will show up under the all option when you press filter. So as you can see, if I use all, I'm now part of all of these 45 approved projects. These are projects that are in design, 4 of the issued and executed projects, and so on. Or if I just want to look at the projects that I'm responsible for directly, I can kind of filter that down and limit it down to the 10 or 12 projects I'm actively working on. Or you can look at projects by location. So if we're in a particular location, Archibus identifies all of the locations where projects are, and you can filter that way as well. So this view at the top of the screen really is a filter just to kind of limit what's being shown down below. As you can see, you can also look for specific statuses, like all of the open projects or approved projects, issued projects. And if we click on more, and if you have lots of projects and you want to limit them, you can single out a specific type of project, whether it's an expansion, a renovation, leasing, acquisition, the type of program, the location, the organizational unit, the city, the project manager, and so on. So there's a variety of different ways to limit what we see down below. I'm just going to press less here, and then we can look at the projects. Up above, before I do that though, up above, I just want to point out a couple things. One is that if you don't see a project here that you would like to be aware of and keep track of, you are able, if you are if you've been assigned the correct permissions, you will be able to actually select from a list of all of the current projects in the system and join that project so that you're able to review and look at what's happening with those projects. This is generally kind of restricted more to the overall portfolio manager. So you may or may not see this button, but if you do see it, that's what it's allowing you to do. The alerts are, like I said before, all of those 9 kind of items that will show up on the dashboard or on the other reports that show you things like your current open actions or work packages out for bid, contracts that are pending a signature, actions behind schedule, of course, invoices that need approval, and any kind of high priority communication that's being captured. So that will show up at the top of the list. And if you drill into one of these, it'll actually tell you which project, which vendor is needing the approval, and what the approval, what the bid amount in this case is. So that's kind of as a quick little report just to point you in the right direction. If I go to look at the high priority log, I can see Build HQ new has a previously unrecorded hazardous material that's been found, and it's a safety violation. So that lets me know what's happening there. Also at the top of the screen, there's a couple of buttons that I think are just useful in general when you're using Archibus. One is when you see this little box with the arrow, it is usually some kind of an export tool, which should let you know that Archibus can export to different formats. In this case, if we had a screen with all of the project details, we could export that to docx, which just looks like this. You click on it and it generates a view, and you can open the view in Microsoft Word. So there's your kind of a basic Word document that you can modify and play around with. Let's close that. If you export to Excel, most of the screens as well can export to an Excel format. So if you wanted to do reporting or you wanted to modify information in Excel, here's that same data on the screen grouped by status with the totals at the bottom. And we now have it formatted in Excel for you to play with. So that's another possibility on most of these Archibus screens. Down below, as I click on the arrow, I can expand each of the groupings or the statuses and look at all of those projects in a similar report fashion that we saw earlier, where you have the status, the site, the budget, the revised contract, invoice total, and so on, all those same pieces of information. And like on the other screen, we can drill into the project to see the details. The difference now is we're going to be able to have access to a lot more of the data. So we'll first start by looking at the project itself. We can select the project, and we get brought to this next tab called the dashboard. So the project dashboard gives you a view of an individual project as opposed to this screen, which gives you a look at all of the projects together. And when we look at the dashboard, there's a couple of things there's three different areas. The first area is this profile of the project, where if I click on the profile button, I'm able to go in and modify information about the project. I can edit it and save the information. So here's where I can update information about the name, the score, the funding probability. These are probably things that you don't have to be worried about. Jerry's going to talk about that, but you have the ability to review all of this information. And if it's necessary, you can update some of this information. If, for example, you have to stop a project or put it on hold, you can change the status here. And you can update any of the descriptions and information about that project, the contact manager, the departmental contact, any triggering circumstances, the approving manager, and so on. Area affected. I think someone yesterday asked about the area in Archibus. And it's kind of surprising that it's not here, but what you probably aren't aware of is Archibus also has a whole application which manages the space within buildings, and it captures the total area of all floors, all the different rooms on those floors, and it can help you actually calculate this total area affected. So I'm a little surprised Archibus hasn't integrated that here so that you can actually go to a floor plan and select the rooms. But again, this is where you kind of identify that area that's being affected. And that's kind of some of the basic project profile that you can update. And Jerry will talk about the projects in a little bit more detail. Over down below that is another area which is just designed to give you some kind of key pieces of information or quick access to certain types of data. For example, if you're interested in the alerts that you saw earlier, you can jump in and look at those alerts, see what's happening with them, and then go and manage those alerts. Each of the work packages and tasks can be assigned to separate milestones. So again, if you wanted to add a milestone and kind of manage the project based on 4 or 5 key milestones, you can add those and see them here. You can identify the team. So if you wanted to add all of the team members in the project to give them access to reviewing it within Archibus, you can add employees, vendors, the technicians who are doing maintenance, other types of contacts in Archibus. All of these are available to add. So if I want to add my vendor, I have a list of vendors here. If I want to add an employee, we have a list of employees here. I think someone yesterday probably wasn't aware that Archibus is going to have a lot of this information already built in. So we'll already have things like the buildings and floors and rooms and spaces in the system. We'll have an import of employees. I think, Jerry, was it, did you say you imported 50,000 or something the other night?
Yes, there was well, we're looking at doing more exports or more imports in the future, Sean, correct?
So a lot of this data will already exist in the system, and your job will just be to make sure that the project has been updated with that information. Communication logs as for things like correspondence and meeting notes. Going into a little bit of probably more detail than Jerry needs me to do, but you can add documents as well. And then over on the right, you're going to see options for working with those individual design packages. So we can, if you need to, you can update a package. You can go into the details of the package here and update the overall status of the design package itself, basically the contract itself, the start and end dates, the approving manager, and so on. And then you can go into the details of the contract that you have. So what are the dates for the contract, the amounts of the contract, what's happening with the contract currently. I think you're going to be skipping the bid process, so you'll go right to the signed process, and then you have that kind of information gets captured and reported on the front screen here under where it says select project. And then as you manage the project, you have access to change orders, invoices, and actions. So that's there's a lot of the detail that you have for each of the projects can be captured in this one screen. Even you'll find there are tools not only for exporting to Doc or Excel, but in the case of each of the individual action items or tasks or to-do lists, you can also not only export this to Excel, but you can export this to Microsoft project formats and templates and import from those formats. So what we're basically saying here is Archibus, although it looks and has some of the same tools that a project tool does, you can still allow project managers to manage their individual projects in Excel or Microsoft Project, or if they have another format, you can export the data to that format, import it, and let them work in their own system, as long as they can then push that information back into Archibus to get that high level picture again. Just as an example of the detail, a task very similar to any task in any project management tool has the the ability to associate to it the WBS code, a type of task, the date that it's required, the date to perform, date started, a whole variety of duration of the task, cost for design, as well as the baseline estimates, and then locations, equipment it's assigned to, work that has to be done as part of this task. And there's a whole lot of other information as well that you can fill out. And Jerry will talk about exactly what you guys will be doing day to day when you do that. But all of these actions, again, will be shown on a screen like you have here. Archibus does include a Gantt chart. There is the ability to create and add these tasks here, to edit them from the screen. And as you can see, create some basic dependencies in the system. You just click on these little items and create your dependencies. And as you move these guys, the system's going to try to adjust the dates accordingly. And you can say yes, and now those items have been kind of rearranged. So there is this kind of project capability as well within Archibus. But how you end up using it and how it speaks to the other systems, that often is done kind of on a regular basis or on an automated basis between finance and either your project tools. So I'm going to just stop here. I think this is probably enough detail for you to get from the top down into the middle of the area. And then I think it's now Jerry's turn to talk about how you're going to be using this particular tool on a day-to-day basis. Before I turn it over, Jerry, have I missed anything, or does anyone have any questions or comments so far?
I think you've done an amazing job, fabulous oversight. I think that one of the things that I'd offer for everybody, particularly if you're newer to BCIT or to Archibus, there's a lot of depth and a lot of features that Sean went over. Our process maturity at BCIT is in various stages right now. So if you're looking at some of these things, you're like, oh, I wasn't told about that, or when is this going to be instigated? Not everything that Sean talked about is in play at BCIT right now, but could be in the future, which shows the power of the tool. That's just my comments, but fabulous overview, Sean. And again, any other questions before we get into my life-changing part of the presentation?
No, well done.
Perfect. We have at least one person awake, so we're meeting that success criteria. That's great. I'm going to take us back to the obligatory PowerPoint for the next 30 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes. Going to be taking you folks through more of the day-to-day. So Sean did a great job of showing top down where we kind of get to with endgame with Archibus, being able to allow project managers to be looking at things in an aggregate fashion, as well as Ian and Joe and other leadership looking at kind of from a meta view and zeroing in on things. As mentioned, depending on the process maturity that's in play at BCIT right now, some of these items are already instigated. Some of them we'll be looking at as we move down the road. But right now, let's share back to the PowerPoint. So for myself, from a bottom-up perspective, one of the things that we had, one of the first comments that we had when we passed from Sean back to myself yesterday, just before we did, was that's great from a high-level perspective, but what about the day-to-day? This is what we're getting into now. As I mentioned, there's three things that I want to talk about. One is BCIT workflow. This is a high-level swim lane that we're going to be looking at, not pretending to encapsulate all the complexity of project management or coordinators' jobs during the day. Being a project manager, I know that there's a lot of herding of cats that goes on, and a lot of complexities and a lot of different pulls in the day. So this we're not trying to capture all of that. We're just trying to capture high level what goes on at BCIT from a perspective of using Archibus with an end game that Sean presented. So we're talking about the workflow. Also going to talk about the hierarchy in Archibus. Sean already touched on this. but we're just going to talk about the three pieces that you need to be aware of, kind of the Trinity and Archibus, the project, work package, and action relationship. Then we're going to talk about actual project execution, which is what most of you are probably looking at from today's presentation is, Jerry, can you show us kind of where does the rubber meet the road? Can you actually show us what this looks like in the project so we have an idea of where we should be putting in and refining information? So let's talk about workflow to begin with. And let's just zoom in here. So on this 101 swim lane, we've got three disciplines here. We've got finance, project managers, Ian and Joe. The top level perspective, from an Ian and Joe perspective, there's project setup that took place. Now this is pieces of information and work that were done in aggregate before we launched the tool. So that would be things like Ian and Joe identifying and articulating program types in the application, locations, project types, drop-down list, configuration. That was kind of 80 to 90% of that would be a one-time activity that they did. They can articulate that as they go along. That's not something that we're going to be looking at today, but that was done kind of prior to launch. From that perspective, from that point rather, there's two general ways that you're going to be receiving projects from Ian or Joe. One is from a work request, the other is from a template. Now, work request would be, as I mentioned, in corrective maintenance. Somebody sends a ticket in and it's worked. Ian or Joe have the ability to take that ticket and turn it into an actual project in Archibus. So that would be one way that core information is set up in Archibus and then sent to you folks. The other would be from a template, which was articulated a little bit earlier in the presentation today. A template in Archibus is analogous to a template in Word. So in Word, if you had same boilerplate information you didn't want to redo 7 times a week, if you're using that same document, you'd set up a template, a docx, I think it's called, or a doc.dot. And it's similar to that in Archibus, different extension name, but it's the same sort of idea. You can have a project template that's set up that's going to populate core information so you don't have to enter the same information time and time again. At BCIT, there are 3 templates currently in play. One is from $0 to $3 million. One is from $3 to $10 million. One is from $10 million and up. There's also discussion that we've had, that I've had some conversations with Joe and on side with Ian as well about the possibility of setting up some other flavors of templates as we go along that would allow a little bit of a mix and match of Ian and Joe to set up the core skeletal information and then allow project managers to fill that in. But right now we're dealing with one of those 3 templates, which gives me a segue to talk about the next piece. What do they do when they're setting up this project information? If you're used to using different tools like Microsoft Project, etc., tiny bit different nomenclature that we'll talk about in Archibus. So in Archibus, the Trinity, the 3 pieces, the hierarchy that I mentioned before are as follows. 1, you have a project, top level. That project is made up of one or many work packages, what Sean articulated and delineated in his presentation. Those work packages are discrete pieces of work package information that are put together. And those work packages can have one or many actions in them. Actions, just a synonym for tasks. So you have a project, which is made up of one or many work packages, which is each work package can contain one or many actions, which is another word for a task. So Ian and Joe are going to use a template or generate it from a work project or from a work request, excuse me. Once they generate it, they set up X number of work packages or work those from the template. Within those templates, you're going to see standard actions that are in there as well. The other thing that they're going to be doing is some cost entry. Now, this is another piece of information that's useful for you to take away from this presentation today. There's at the present point in time, there's kind of 2 levels of cost entry in Archibus. One is what we call a baseline cost entry. So that would consist of Ian and Joe doing a couple things. We'll see this in the tool in just a couple minutes. One thing is they would do an order of magnitude cost for a project. I think that's called project budget in there. And so that would be Ian or Joe, thumb in the air, maybe talking to you guys and gathering some input information or other ancillary financial information they have. But they'd come up and say, oh, this project is about $10,000. Okay, that'd be a project budgeted number. The baseline cost entry would be at an action or a task level, Ian or Joe going in and saying, at this task level, this is about $1,000, this is about $2,000 in aggregate. The total number of baseline cost entries that you have at the action or task level is going to equal what the project comes in at. That's from a baseline cost entry perspective. So when they're first setting up the projects, that's kind of like the scratch pad, the first estimate that we have, baseline cost entry. That then segues over to, and if you're finding my dulcet tones putting you to sleep, this is where you want to kind of perk up and pay attention, because this is where rubber hits the road for project managers, where you're going to start to see stuff, and we'll be looking at the tool in just a few minutes. So Ian and Joe have entered from a template or a work request their project information. They've done some baseline cost entry. They've done it in the context of the Trinity that we talked about, the project work package and action Trinity. And now they've sent it over to you folks. And you are going to go into an area that we'll look at in just a moment called the management console, which Sean gave us a top-down view of. And you're going to see projects that are in different statuses. In this case, you're going to see an approved status for Ryan Jacobs or Christy or Rochelle, whoever. And you're going to drill down into that project, and you're going to see a couple things, and you're going to see a couple items that you need to work. First off, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the design cost entry. So Ian and Joe, if they have entered baseline cost information, you have the ability to pull that information from where they did the estimates into the tool and refine that information. So that's design cost entry. So you've gone from the order of magnitude number to a more delineated fashion based on your 1553 and other ancillary information you have. That'd be one piece of information that you do, is go through and further refine your cost entry. The next piece you're going to do is complete work packages. So there's a couple discrete steps that we go through after you've done the design cost entry to kind of finalize the work package and get it in play. From that point of view, from that perspective, you're really doing a couple of activities. Sean articulated this earlier in the presentation. Typically, you're going to be doing a million things as a project manager. From an Archibus perspective, though, there's just a couple of discrete activities. One would be invoices, one would be change orders, one would be action updates. Let's talk about them play by play. Invoices. Commons team now has in a screen in Archibus, which you will not have access to, they have the ability to go in and enter and process invoice information. One of the questions that comes up is, Jerry, is Archibus fully and completely integrated with the financial and other ancillary systems? The answer is no. It's obviously the holy grail that everybody wants to get to, is every system talks to every system. At this point in time, it's a pretty simple process from a project management perspective. From Commons perspective, she or her team will get invoices in, and they will email them to you as a project manager. Your job obviously is to go in and approve or reject those invoices and send that in email back to Common. Next question, congruent with what we're doing right now, is, Jerry, is there full email capability in Archibus to do that? The answer is no. So Archibus does have some email integration, but for the purpose of invoices, that will be an Outlook process that you're doing. You get something in from Common, you send it back in Outlook. The next question, which is probably burning on Ian's mind, is, but Jerry, is there anywhere in Archibus that will show you if you have invoices outstanding? Excellent question, Ian. Archibus will show you from an alert fashion if you have invoices outstanding to approve. You're also able to go in at the invoice screen at a project level and look at the different statuses of the invoices. So can you go in and work invoices from an Archibus perspective? No. But can you monitor the invoice process with more transparency that you've had in the past? Yes, you can. So that's from an invoice perspective. Next step would be if you have change orders. So if you have a change to the cost of the overall work package, or you have any financial information that needs to be changed, you do that through a change order. We'll look at that momentarily. And finally, at a more granular perspective, would be the action updates or the task updates that you're doing in the system itself. Any questions on this before we actually get into Archibus and you can actually get a graphical of what this actually looks like when the rubber hits the road for you guys doing your day-to-days in Archibus? Any questions? Perfect. I love leaving pregnant pauses just long enough to make myself and everybody a little bit uncomfortable. No further questions. We're going to get into it here. Stop my share and let's open up Archibus. Okay. Ian, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that, or not a thumbs up, but just you can see that? Okay, no worries.
Yep, that's great. Yep,
perfect.
good.
Awesome. So let's talk about, minimize a couple things on my screen here. Let's talk about the overall real estate UI of Archibus. Now, if you've been in there using the system day to day, we're not trying to get too pedantic for you here, but just to give you a couple of hints, or for anybody that's new to the project, new to the product itself. As Sean mentioned, there is a navigation bar over to the left-hand side. The general statement for orienting yourself to Archibus is, if you're new to Archibus or you're not already familiar with this navigation bar, then it's safe to say you probably won't be spending a lot of time over here. This is more for power users or people that have more items revealed by their role than the typical end user would have. From your perspective, if you want to save some real estate on the UI, I would suggest collapsing this tool. The main thing that you're going to be using it for is the home button. Next piece that I would orient you to is what we call buckets in Archibus. Again, this is pretty rudimentary information, but just to give you some context for the playground that you're working within. Buckets are logically grouped pieces of information. You can see setup, request, plan, procure, favorites, etc., all the way down. The question that is often raised is, does everybody have the same view? The answer is no, it's based on your role. So what I'm seeing in a test system is going to be different than what you see in a production system, is also going to be different than what Ian and Joe, as the power users with more capabilities, would see. From your perspective as a project manager, there's 2 points of entry that you want to be aware of, and one that primarily you're going to be spending most of your time in. So the 2 items, the 2 areas right now are edit my projects and management console. Edit my projects would be if you were creating a project from the ground up. Now, per our workflow, as I mentioned, 90 to 95% of the time, you're going to be receiving projects already in play from Ian and Joe. But if you were ever asked, hey, you need to create something from the bottom up, you would do it through edit my projects. It's not something that we're going to be working through today. If you were in the situation where you needed to do that, absolutely give me a call. I can, we can do a one-on-one, can walk you through from the bottom up from creating a project. But from your perspective, once you get that email or voice notification or some other modality of communication from Ian and Joe that you have a new project in play, management console is where you're going to want to hit. Let's open that up. And of course, it's timed out. Wait for the gerbils to do their work, and management console. So let's collapse this taskbar again. And again, Sean gave you a great overview. I'm going to drill down on a few other items here. When you're looking at the management console screen in aggregate, as Sean said, you're going to see projects that you have access to. As you open them up, there's different statuses, approved, completed actions. There's a number of different statuses that we have showing here today. And there's a couple other that don't show up, but would as a project is cycled through various processes. Let's now look at the rest of the real estate UI. Top level here, you'll notice it says select project, and the rest of the items are grayed out. Project dashboard and a couple others that Sean was moving through. Why are they grayed out? They will activate as you select a project. So let's go ahead and open up approved. We've got a project template that I've set up for myself here. As we click this, expected behavior would be these would light up. By light up, I mean be not gray. And sure enough, you can now see, so you select a project, and now these items activate. In Archibus, there are 2 levels of taskbars that you're going to see. This is the top level, project level action bar that you have. And as you select a work package, it's going to bring up a secondary bar, which we'll look at in just a minute. As Sean mentioned, profile is a piece of information you can go in. So if you're, this is if it's the first project you've seen from Archibus, or if you've seen a million, not a bad idea to orient yourself from the profile. Couple other points that I would bring up, ancillary to what Sean mentioned, is mandatory fields in Archibus. When Ian and Joe are entering items, would have a red star beside them. Here's an example down here, date requested start. You can see has a star. We're in a test system right now, but in the live system, I can tell you that context, the background context, project charter, the scope and the objectives, even though I've put in my QWERTY data just to fill it out here, those are all starred. So they're going to have some mandatory information that has to go in there. Other pieces that you could go in and enter yourself if you wanted. You could update these pieces of information. You could upload documents, and you could also look at the rest of the information that's in play right now. If you look upper right-hand corner, you're going to notice that there's a cost budgeted. When we went through the workflow, this is what I mentioned as an order of magnitude, which is my PMI fancy way of saying, high level 10,000 foot estimate that they put in. So in this case, Ian or Joe have indicated this project was $10,000. And they've also, in this case, talked to you, the project manager, and you guys have indicated from your 1553 that you went through that it was actually $9,000. So they said $10,000 to start. You guys articulated it was $9,000. And you're also going to notice that there is a $3,000 amount. Now, this is task level information that they've gone through and updated. So we've got a project baseline of $3,000 as it's landed in your lap. Let's go back to the select project. And what I mentioned in the workflow, and I'll be sending collateral around in the next couple of days, so you guys have some printed documents for kind of training aids for this, kind of a 2-page path that you can follow for entering and updating information. But one of the things that I mentioned is the first thing you're going to do is come in here and update your project information. If we look at the project dashboard, save that. If we look at the project dashboard right now, again, we can see that $10,000 is where it started. We can see that there's a baseline of $3,000. First thing you're going to want to do is go over to report options and go show more fields. We're doing that for the simple reason that it gives us a couple more fields to look at. One of them is design costs. Now, remember that I mentioned that there are 2 levels of cost in play in Archibus. One is the baseline that Ian and Joe entered when they put the project information in. They've indicated that it's about $10,000, but right now they've got about $3,000 that they've put in as a baseline. We want to pull that information over into the execution status of the project that you're in right now, and so that it shows up on the design cost itself. So let's do that. Number 1, as I mentioned, you go report options, show more details. Number 2, you're going to go up to actions on the top level of the status bar here. You're going to click actions. You are going to select one or many of the work packages that we're looking at right now. And you can see in my case, and I've labeled these for the purposes of training today, I've got 2 items here that have BCE. That's just Jerry's acronym friendly way of saying base cost entry. So I just, as a memory jogger for myself, we've got 2 pieces of work packages that have baseline information that Ian and Joe have uploaded into the system. So we're going to highlight one or many of those items. We're going to go to more options, and we're going to go copy baseline costs. That brings the information over from what Ian and Joe have entered into your project. Copy baseline cost. Yes. Wait for it to update. Now, when we go back to the project dashboard, you're going to see that there's a design cost. So we've got a baseline cost in there. They said it was about $3,000. You're also going to see that now on the work package itself, there's $3,000. Next step that you want to go through from that workflow is to actually drill down into the work package itself to further delineate these costs and then complete the work package. And then after that, it's just kind of maintenance mode for the project from an Archibus perspective. So let's look at what that means. As Sean mentioned, one area, upper left-hand corner, is the profile. This area that we're looking at are all of the work packages that have been generated by the template or project entry process that Ian and Joe have done. So each one of these indicate a specific work package. You remember the Trinity that we talked about. We have a project made up of work packages. Once you go into a work package itself, I mentioned that a work package can have one or many actions associated with it. And such is the case. I also mentioned right at the start of the project that you have a top level taskbar here. And I mentioned that there would be a secondary taskbar that shows up when you hit work packages. Let's just go back and look at that again. So we got top level, just one level of bar. And as we select one of the work packages, second level bar comes up for navigation, etc. We mentioned that work packages are made up of one or many actions. So we're going to hit actions. Now, a common question that comes up when people are working with Archibus, just as a tiny little sidebar here, why are there two actions? There's an action there and an action there. If you followed my fascinating discursive explanation of how the UI is set up, the top level will be from a project level. So if I wanted to see all the actions in a project, I would click that. If I wanted to do it within a work package, I would hit the work package level item. So we're going to do that. I'm going to click actions. Back to our Trinity again. Yes, I'm repeating it for a purpose so it sticks out in everybody's mind. Slightly annoying, but useful information. So we've got a project made up of many work packages, and each work package has an action or one or many actions associated with it. You can now start to see, we're now looking at the action level, the most granular layer of the project. You can also see that there's a design cost in there. You'll remember that they put that in as a baseline cost when they put the information. We basically told Archibus, bring it over. Now that we're into the project execution, I want you to bring it over. And it's brought those two items over from the baseline cost. So your next job, when you're in working tactically day to day, is to go into the work package itself, open up the action item, make any updates that you want to for the design cost. In this case, you've got the ability to change the Schedule 1553 design level. You can also change the dollar amount. So let's change that from $1,000 to $1,022, just so it's something that shows up, pretty easy to see. We press save. You can see that it's updated there. We'll go through and change the other one as well, because we come in and we've done a little bit more Schedule 1553 work or other project work, and now it's not $2,000, but it's $2,142. So we've gone through, we've updated first of all, we brought the information over from baseline, we've updated those design costs. Now when we go back to the project dashboard, you're going to see that the design costs have been updated. And the last piece that you're going to do before you walk into kind of the day-to-day management of the project itself is to go in and complete the work package. So let's take project identification, because that's the one we've been playing with right now. Let's open that up. What we did, where we just we're playing around, was in the action level, but we finished the action level. We're good. We're ready to lock things in from a work package perspective. As Sean mentioned accurately, right now, we're not sending things out for bid from a business process perspective. We're going to be doing what's called skip bidding process. So this is the way that you finalize your work package and then move into kind of monitoring mode. Click skip bidding process. You're going to select a vendor. You're going to put a start date and an end date in there. Again, mandatory fields, red asterisk. You're going to go approve. Any other details you need to enter. For this one, we're going to put, what was the total we had down here at the project dashboard? 3164. Let's go back and put in 3164. Sign contract. And you're now in business. Now when we go back to the project dashboard, you're going to see a couple of things. You're going to see a contract amount that's in there because the work package is being finalized. And on the path to finalization, you went in at a task level and updated numbers. So the three-step process, you brought information over from the baseline, you updated it, you signed the contract, you're in business. You've now got design costs, contract amounts are in there. And as other financial information is entered, it's going to be reflected up here. Let's go back into the work package perspective. We mentioned, or I mentioned on the workflow that we worked through, is that you update financial information, you sign the contract and work the work package information. What other pieces are you going to be doing once you're in here? One is change order and the other is action items. Now, let's look right now at this work package perspective that we're in right now, project identification that we just signed off. Where this sits in play right now from a contract details perspective, this was highlighted yesterday, and it's worth mentioning again. If you go in there and try and update this information, you are not able to. So this is kind of out of box design by Archibus. And what this is saying is effectively, once a contract is in place, you shouldn't, without some kind of approval process, be able to go in and change numbered items that way. Now, it is something that's we discussed with Joe and a couple of the project managers and Ian over time here. This is something that we're going to be refining because I understand from a project management perspective, it's not always going to be locked in there. You might have to change things. So for the time being, I'm going to show you how you work that. If you have a number that needs to be changed, you're going to be doing that through a change order. Maybe not the most elegant work process, but this is something we'll be looking at refining as we go along. And so right now, if you need to go in and change that, what you do is you do a change order. Let's talk about the change order work process. Another question, if anybody is falling asleep in the background right now, is this information going to be saved for later playback? Because you're talking a million miles a minute, Jerry. Yes, this will all be recorded and sent out to you guys in the next couple of days, along with some collateral documentation. So let's talk about. Jerry. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I had a question just before you move on to change orders.
You bet.
This may be maybe an Archibus question. It might just be a question for Ian and how they want to use it. But I guess the way that you change if you go back to the project dashboard.
Yeah.
And you had the design costs, and the design costs originally were the budget that was allotted. And then you created the contracts to show the actual kind of contract amount. Like, would we not want to keep the first column as the original budget so that we could see a variance? And
good question. Yeah, that's a good question. Are you talking about, that's Jonathan, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you're talking about in this column display. So you'd have an original and then a variance, kind of a left to right flow.
Yeah, because I don't see if there is a somewhere, or I guess one of the columns to the right, there's nothing that shows a variance amount to the budget.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we. I'm going to take that as something that's it's a great point, and I like the way that you're thinking logically left to right, so that we maybe want to see baseline, design, and variance. So, sorry, was there another comment there?
John, the report options. There is a report that compares baseline to design and variances. I'm just wondering if that report is under the report options.
Let's have a look here. Schedule variances.
Try cost variances. I can't remember what all of these reports, but try the.
No, for sure. Estimated action cost variances. Is that what you're looking at, Sean?
Yeah, just see if that's gives him something close to what he's asking for. So there's the baseline cost there, and the design estimated costs, and then the actuals, and then there should be a variance, I think.
There you go.
Design and baseline.
This is why you have Sean on the call, because he's got this stuff top of mind. Does that look close to what you're looking for, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean because I mean that's to me that's one of the things that you want to see as a project manager, kind of out of these screens, right? Like, what was your original goal? Where are you projecting, and how are you tracking towards that projection?
100%. Yeah.
So no, that's good. Okay, that's good to know that report is there. So that's, and then, yeah, no, that's perfect.
Fabulous question. No, that's great. That's great collateral for everybody to be aware of. So thank you for bringing that. Let's go back down. I am talking fairly quickly here, and as I have a tendency to do, but it's just to get through the subject matter, and then we'll have an opportunity for any other questions, or if anybody else has anything else, bring it up as we go along here. But let's go back into the project dashboard here. Let's open up our item, and let's talk about entering a change order. So for a change order, you have to walk through a couple steps to do that. Number one is the work package itself. You need to go in and choose an approval manager. Now, the observation internally that probably a lot of you will make is that this process should be refined a little bit. Won't argue with you there. It's something that Ian and Joe and I have talked about. The purpose of getting the first iteration of Archibus out was to highlight some of these processes that we need to refine more. But in terms of actually getting through the change control right now, you're going to go through and choose an approval manager. Data that we're looking at in the system right now, because it's a test system, is not really germane. So you're going to have a first name and a last name. I'm just going to choose one arbitrarily that's got an A number there and save. The reason you have to make sure that at a contract level that you have an approving manager is when you go in and do a change order, you're going to go press add. You're going to see right up top here, it says to approve or reject, select a work package approval manager below. If you didn't do the step that I just articulated, you're going to come down and look for an approval manager and it won't be there. So let's go through and change this by $2,000 just for fun. And let's choose an approval manager and press save. It's going to give you any mandatory fields you need to enter and approve change order. Now, when we go back to the project dashboard, you're going to see any approved change orders. That's also going to be reflected in the updated design costs. I'll try and head off another question that a number of you might have is what I just showed you, choosing your own approval manager and going through and approving it yourself. The question comes up, should there be a more articulated or regimented approval process for change orders? The answer is possibly. I mean, yes, in a pure methodology perspective, from a governance perspective, Ian Joe perspective, yes, you'd want to have that. But we also recognize that Archibus isn't necessarily the final arbiter of contract management right now. So this is another piece that we'll be looking at. Do we want to actually, instead of just allowing a project manager to go in there and choose approval manager and facilitate that changes, do we want to have something more regimented? That will be something that we'll look at go forward. Let's go back into the project itself here and talk about the last piece. So you've gone in, you've updated your information, you've completed your work package. There's going to be change orders that come in that need to be done by folks now and again. Invoices we've talked about already. Don't have any data to show you here. Again, this is not going to be a place that you're going to be going through, clicking, pointing, and updating information. But what it will do is show you the different state of play for 17 different invoices and what state of play there are within Common. Again, from a work management perspective, from a project dashboard, alerts would be one of the places that you're going to see that invoices. If you have outstanding invoices, it'll drive you back to the invoice page. You can look at that cursory information, go back to Outlook, send your approval, you're in business. Let's go back to the work package information and talk about actions. So this is really going to be, the day-to-day. So you've done your basic project refinement, your work package refinement, change orders as they come along, and now it's going to be day-to-day management of everything you do. From an Archibus perspective, you would literally go in. There's a couple different ways to update action information. One would be to go in from a work package perspective, look at the action tab, look at all the different actions that you have, drill down in on them. It's going to be anything that's mandatory that we flagged as mandatory information right now will be starred. Again, as Sean mentioned, there's going to be a couple places that are going to be most germane for you, probably percent complete, any date requirements that you have, but updating this 2550, however you work with your progress methodology. So updating tasks, you can also update cost information ongoing. Another way, if you want to go in and do kind of a lighter touch in terms of your action updating, you can select one or many items and go update selected, and it's going to give you the opportunity to in aggregate select statuses, percent complete, date start finished, etc. So quick way to batch update tasks that are in play. Two last points that I'd make before, thankfully, for everybody, I'll stop talking for a minute. Two other points that I'd make. One is going back to the project dashboard. Right now, as I mentioned, work request would be one way, and template would be another way for project information to get from Ian and Joe to you folks. Now, what this could end up being is that you have a pretty well articulated project with many work packages and many work actions, actions below it. But what if you don't need, or if you need to rearrange these work packages? Again, a suggestion that came up from yesterday was the ability to refine this process to make it a little bit easier and not so onerous to go in, but it is possible to go in and tidy these up. Let's say, for instance, that you didn't want to have contractor engaged, or you would literally click the work package itself, you click on details, you click delete, get rid of the work package and work actions, and it's gone. Another point is how this information is sorted. So it's sorted by work breakdown structure. You can see the work breakdown structure by clicking on a work package itself and going details. And you're going to see the WBS code right there. So let's go back. For instance, let's say that, that we've got decision point 4, kind of a little bit longer text there, and that we wanted to have that show right up at the top. So you'd literally open it up. Click on the details itself after we've gone through and done the skip bidding process. So let's just kill that 1 second. Do our mandatory processes. Another thing that I didn't mention here is when you're going through and using calendar controls within Archibus, you can either play with the masking, or if you're like me and don't have patience for that, just hit the calendar picker and that'll do the masking for you. So let's approve that. Sign the contract. And now let's go into details itself. And we're going to change this WBS code from 31 to 01. Expected behavior would be when we save that and go back, that we're able to actually see that updated. And you can now see that it's at the top of the list. So we've gone through a lot of information here in the last 37 minutes, went a little bit longer than I wanted to. Recap, information comes into you. You go from select project, you can see items in a project status. You click the status. You go through and add report options, show more fields when that option is there. You're going to go in, you're going to go to actions, you're going to update the costs, you're going to work package by work package to go in, drop down into the action items, update any cost information that you have. You're going to go back at a work package level, send that out on a no bid process. And from that perspective, from an execution perspective, you've really got the 3 items that are left here: change orders that need to be made, invoices that are going to be coming in that you'll be managing in that work process outside of Archibus, but articulated and displayed in Archibus, and finally doing your action updates. As Sean mentioned, Gantt charts available. One of the items on the Gantt chart that's available, Sean also mentioned that there's something called milestones. So milestones allows you to add one or many milestones in here. And just so you know, once you put a milestone in here, it's automatically reflected in the Gantt chart itself. So I put one in here, Jerry milestone, really imaginatively titled. And if I go to the Gantt chart itself, expected behavior would be at the bottom here. You'd see a Jerry milestone. There you go. Zoom in, zoom out. There's just one other thing I would note from an Archibus perspective. Sean mentioned you can do start to finish dependencies by clicking and dragging from one to another. If you want to get rid of that dependency that you've done, you can simply click into the task, and this shows you another way. Once you've got tasks articulated on the left-hand side, you can double click it. What you're going to do is click the proper task here, the one down below, the one that has a predecessor. You get rid of the predecessor and press save, gets rid of your start finish dependency. So again, I went a little bit over on my time, got a little bit excited with hearing the sound of my own voice, but that gives you kind of a start to finish perspective of Archibus. And at this point in time, let's open it up and see if we've got any questions for myself, Sean, or anything that you've seen that's questions, concerns, points of clarification needed. Awesome. Another awesome, awkward, pregnant pause. Thumbs up from Paul.
I've got a question. This is maybe more for BCIT, but how real time is the invoice information in the, if we go back to the project dashboard?
Yeah.
Jerry, like the invoice information as to what's been paid and sent out. So like basically to track the actual cost. How real time is it expected to be?
I'm going to give you a general answer, and then I'm going to let Ian perhaps laugh and point to give me any updates that he wants. From a BCIT perspective, what we've done, what you guys don't see, is there's a 4-stage process in Archibus that was articulated by finance, by Common. So literally when Common gets, and her group gets an invoice in, it's going to go from a to be approved status to approved to sent to finance to paid. So they've got a 4-step process that they're going to go through. And in terms of how real time it'll be, it depends once something's sent from Commons Group to finance or payment. There's a bit of a black box in terms of those processes that are outside of Ian and Joe's kind of control. So it'll be as real time as finance gets back to us. And Ian, I don't know if you had any other insight that you wanted to offer on
You're
that.
exactly right, Jerry. So between stages 3 and 4, Jonathan, we have no influence over that because it does go to BCIT Central Finance. The only action we get is once it's actually been paid, we get notification. That's when Archibus does get updated. We are looking at an API that does link us back into Banner to pull that information, but still that is dependent on BCIT financing processing our request to pay an invoice. So there's still, it's anywhere between probably 2 and 6 weeks right now in terms of
when Common and her team get an invoice to process, before they send it out to finance, is there, I guess, a process where they'll kind of put it as an invoice in progress?
Yes.
So that we
absolutely.
can see it.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. It does show up in Archibus as in progress. So yeah, you'll see them. Like all the information we have on our end does get uploaded into the console. It's just that back end stuff that we're still working with Central Finance on for the payment portion of it.
I'm gonna I'll give you a behind the scenes view as long as there's no laughing or pointing or derisive comments because there's a lot of test data in here when I was playing around with it. But with my role right now, I have the ability to see what Common and their team would. So it's literally called imaginatively Banner Invoices. And when they go into Banner Invoices, this is just kind of show you the pedagogy that we have for this, is that we have to be approved. So this is, they've put something in, they've emailed it to you folks. They've now got it in a status of, and this is all just junk data, so forgive me, but they would have an item that's being sent off to you folks. They have the ability and the necessity to put a vendor invoice in there. When they get an approval email from you folks back, they're going to attach that approval email in here. So they're going to have that. Once it's approved, let's say that it's Jonathan, you just sent your email approval back. It'll show up in an approved status. There's a left to right pedagogy stepwise process that we go through here. After it's approved, then they will select one or many items and they get sent to finance. Once they've been sent from finance and they get a Banner transaction ID, it goes in here and it shows up as paid. So from your perspective, when you're looking, you're not going to see that level of detail, but it's an improvement in the process now, in that we've got some, even though it's a manual process that they're entering, we've got some transparency within Archibus itself. So when you go through and select your project and select your invoices, you're going to see invoices that are in the various statuses. So definitely not a perfect process, but definitely a quantum leap forward. And as Ian mentioned, the desired end goal for everybody would be to have every system talk to every system. There's a fair amount of complexity involvement there, but we'll get there. Yeah,
and that's a good improvement. Like at least if for like the day-to-day, it's good to just have that. Even if it's in process, like it's not that I don't care whether people get paid. Like I do want that information eventually, but as long as it's there, so I'm tracking kind of cost already spent, and that's good, and that is an improvement. So
Yeah,
thanks
100%.
for the answer.
Yeah, you bet. They also have some ability in there to move between statuses. So if something happened and something was withdrawn or contested or whatever, they also have the ability to move stuff back in the process as well. So that's something that Common in the View Joe and Ian worked on articulating those work processes. So definitely a step forward. I would offer one other point, just a kind of a general point in our waning minutes here, which is another. I've had feedback from a number of different people of that's great. It's been out there for 6 months. We're getting there. We're getting up to speed on it, Jerry. What about suggestions that I have for improvement for the application, etc. So we're going to be engaging in a process in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We'll be hitting you folks up for. Well, you'll have the opportunity to not just come and have one-way information thrown at you like today, but actually the ability to come back and say, yeah, Jerry, we've been using this for 0 to 6 months, however long you've been using it. And there's 17 things that we need you to be aware of. Joe and Ian have been articulated very prescriptively to me that we want the tool to be out there from an early date 6 months ago, but we also need to have an iterative feedback cycle that goes on so that we're improving on things. I also understand getting to the point that Sean, bringing us full circle back at the start of the presentation, getting us to that point where we have those dashboards and the ability to see everything is predicated on an axiom, and that axiom is that good data is going in. To get that good data in, we understand that there's going to be work processes that need to be refined. We also understand that your day is spent actually doing project management, and it's not meant to be kneecapping people by spending laborious amounts of time in Archibus. So long story short, iterative process important. We know that there will be improvements made on some of the processes. I think one of the primary pieces for right now that I'm going to be looking at is talking to Ian and Joe about the change order process. That was something that was highlighted a couple times about being able to go and update numbers. So just seeing if we can refine that process a little bit, but that's what you can expect go forward. I mentioned at the start of the presentation today that I had a couple of areas for success criteria. One, joking, not joking, was that we didn't put anybody to sleep. So I hope I didn't. If I did, you'll again be able to listen to the dulcet, somnolescent tones of Jerry going through project management demonstration at your own leisure. I'll also be putting together a training aid. There is a manual that I've been putting together that's been waylaid a couple times due to conflicting activities, but it's up to quite a few pages right now. What I do want to get out sooner rather than later is a training aid that just gives you like a 2-page PDF that goes through exactly what we've talked about today. Jerry was droning on about baseline versus design. What is that? What are the 3 steps that he mentioned? Here you go. What are the 6 pieces of information Jerry said that we need to enter? Here you go. So that'll be some of the collateral that we've got out there. Right now, that brings us pretty much closed time. So last chance for anybody, if you have any questions, comments, clarifications needed.
I just want to thank Sean and Jerry. Great presentation, guys. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that, Ian. And I'd like to thank you for leadership on this and everybody else for taking the time. I know your days are super busy. And sometimes it can be challenging wanting to spend time on a new tool when you're doing everything else, but hopefully you can see the end game and how this is going to make your day, your project management activities help usher them along to better maturity. And Sean, anything else in closing here today? Nope, we're good. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. For anybody who hasn't been in contact with me, I'm usually pretty quick to get back on email, but if you have questions, concerns, comments, please let me know. You'll have my contact information, phone, email, etc. In any emails that I've sent. So thanks again for today. Really appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Sean.
Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.